Hey guys, we're talking about the Ten Commandments this week, and this is the story of Moses going up on the mountain. He receives the law from God, and it's written on stone tablets, and he takes them down. So, to look at this story a little bit, it's in Exodus 20 if you'd like to read about it, but just kind of want to look at it compared to other cultures and other histories. The story of Moses and the Ten Commandments actually turns out isn't very unique. There's other cultures that have really similar stories. For example, in the Persian culture, there's a story of a man named Zoroaster, and Zoroaster receives the book of the law from God atop a mountain. Similarly, in the Greek culture, we also see the story of Dionysus and Bacchus, sons of Zeus, and the law is written on two different stone tablets. So we have interesting comparisons in other cultures to this story of Moses and the Ten Commandments. Now, why is the Jewish version of this story so important? Why is it interesting? Why is it worth thinking about? Have you asked that question ever? Well, I was thinking about that question, and I think maybe to answer that question, we're going to compare the law given in the Ten Commandments to a different law. That's the law of the Code of Hammurabi. Now, if you've ever heard of the Code of Hammurabi before, it was a law that was fairly common. It was kind of seen as the first constitution, if you will, for the people in the Babylonian Empire in about 1700 BCE. Now, the Code of Hammurabi is an interesting code because if you read it, it's very strict. There's a lot of good English translations out there, and you can look at some of them. For example, in one of the codes it says, if anyone commits robbery and is caught, he will be put to death. He won't be punished or thrown in jail. He'll be put to death. In fact, a lot of the codes end with, and he will be put to death. Now, what's interesting about that is the whole if he will be caught. Did you hear that? The code says only if he's caught he'll be put to death. Now, that seems kind of obvious, but really the law is only about people's external actions, only about what they do, not what they think or feel or believe or know. And I think we see a big difference right away to the Ten Commandments in just that. Another one of the Code of Hammurabi's statements says, if anyone brings an accusation of crimes before the elders and does not prove what he has charged, he shall, if a capital offense is charged, be put to death. I mean, basically what that's saying is don't mess with the people who have power, right? It's fairly easy to see that there. It's kind of a law that wants to keep those in power in power. Interesting there because the Ten Commandments are not really interested in power claims. If they're interested in any power claims, it's God saying that he has a stake in all humanity. So, kind of interesting comparisons there, reading through the two. The Ten Commandments is really, while it might sound strict if read alone, it's a very lenient law system. It kind of goes with the eye for an eye deal. Whereas the Code of Hammurabi is if you steal and get caught, you're put to death. It's definitely not an eye for an eye. So, interesting. The Ten Commandments. Now, if you look at most of them, they're a little redundant. They're about honoring God. They're about respecting each other and treating each other with honesty, really. I mean, they start to sound a little redundant when you read all 10 of them. They're all kind of saying those one or two things. Now, when somebody tells me what to do, I generally don't like it. A commandment, even that word, I don't like it. I'll be real honest. I'm an American citizen. I believe that I have certain freedoms. And when somebody comes in and says, you have to follow this commandment, I have a knee-jerk reaction. I don't want to. I think that's how a lot of us feel maybe when we look at this topic, and it kind of becomes a real, I don't know, not a fun thing to talk about, the Ten Commandments. So, the real question to ask here, though, is how did the Jewish people see the Ten Commandments? Now, it's interesting to note that they didn't see them quite how I just described me seeing them. David writes in the Psalms, in Psalm 119, verse 35, he says, "Direct me in the path of your commands, for there I find delight." Now, that's unusual to me, finding delight in a commandment. It's interesting to note that the Jewish people saw the commandments as something that brought peace, that brought love, that brought harmony to the people of Israel. It's not really how I think of the Ten Commandments, but it is how the Jews thought of them. Now let's look at Christianity and the Ten Commandments, because that's where we are today. Are we still bound by these Ten Commandments? Are they part of our Christian law? No, we're not. Martin Luther talks about this, coming from a Lutheran point of view. He says that the Ten Commandments don't apply to us Gentiles and Christians, but only to the Jews. He says if a preacher wishes to force you back to Moses, ask him if you were brought out of Egypt by Moses. Luther has a certain way of putting things, kind of intense. Luther didn't think that they really needed to be used at all. Not by force anyways. He does include them in the catechisms because he thinks they're helpful. He certainly doesn't see them as the law, though. Paul says this in the scriptures in Galatians 3, verse 24 and 25. He says, "The law has become our tutor leading to Christ, that we might be declared righteous due to faith. But now that this faith has arrived, we are no longer under a tutor." So you'll see even in scripture, this law, and this is even bigger than the Ten Commandments, this is all of law, was to lead up to Christ. Now that Christ is in the picture, the law doesn't have a hold over us. In fact, Jesus himself, he even sums up all of the Ten Commandments. Do you know how he does that? He says real simply, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and love your neighbor. Respect him, show him honor. That's it. He sums the whole thing up in that statement. So here's my question for you. When you think about the law, when you think about commandments, do you think about loving other people? Does it help you to want to love your neighbor and God more?